And we are back with part 3 of Metabolical. Yes, it's been once again another sort of couple of week break, but we're gonna finally get through this book and finish it. I don't remember it being particularly long, but there was just a lot of notes we both took, and it wasn't long, but it was dense. So
it was very dense. It was very dense. There were just so many things in it. Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah, no, that is obscene. So yeah, we're gonna crack on with it. And so what point are we up to? So we're now kind of going into how the food is processed and what happens during this process, and to the food, to the quality of the food, and then also a bit around like how it's regulated and the systems that hold it accountable and things like that. So I guess we should just get into it.
Yeah. So I believe it was called. The book was broken up into parts, right? So I'm right to say this is part 4, processed food fight. So in chapter 17, it was talking about food classifications, and and it said that processed food is defined by 7 engineering criteria. So one of them is mass produced, 2 is consistent batch to batch, 3 is consistent country to country, 4 is uses specialized ingredients from specialized companies, 5 consists of pre-frozen macronutrients, 6 must stay emulsified so that the fat and water do not layer out, and 7 must have a long shelf life or freezer life. I thought it was quite interesting because I think his point in the book is if you look at that engineering criteria, so much what we eat in our modern diet like fits almost all of them, if not 5 out of 7 of them, right? Like, mass produced, consistent batch to batch. Like, for example, if you buy a box of cereal, you kind of, you know what you're getting, right? There's no like variation. And it's not even, and like you said there, consistent country to country. It doesn't change where you go. Specialized ingredients, I guess you could argue something like, the additives they put into cereal these days, like added B6, added vitamin D or whatever, all that stuff. And pre-frozen, so must stay emulsified. So my understanding of that isn't that a part of the fiber-based process where it tries to keep it so it stays fresh longer, the emulsification, or am I wrong?
I don't know. I think it's like the kind of stuff that you see in mayonnaise and stuff like that. So that like the two
that was it. Sorry, yes,
broken and that they stay together.
Because obviously there's a lot of fat contained in it, and obviously there's some water. So it's holding the two together so it doesn't separate into I'm trying to think of an example because I guess if you get some organic olive oil and you leave it and it kind of like separates into like layers,
Well, think about like, when you have a dressing and you have olive oil and then you put in some vinegar and the two are separated, and then obviously an emulsifier is added to kind of join the two.
Sorry, that's exactly the perfect example. Yeah, where you literally look at the dressing, you can see or like for example, if you have balsamic vinegar to olive oil as you're dipping, and it separates.
So I'm assuming that there must be like some kind of thing added to hold them together and keep them held together. Otherwise it would just be pretty unappetizing to suddenly get it and it's like broken apart. It's so interesting how so many foods just all fit into those categories.
I think I don't know if we said this in the last podcast, but it kind of makes sense from the perspective of the people who are selling the food, right? So I like this bit here, which is pretty skeptical, isn't it? So one of the originators of the food pyramid, Louise Light, is quoted as saying, ultimately, the food industry dictates the government's food advice, shaping the nutrition agenda delivered to the public. In fact, to the food industry, the purpose of food guides is to persuade consumers that all foods, especially those that they're selling, fit into a healthy diet. And to be honest, as the food pyramid has not changed, for eons, or it's only slightly amended, it's fair to say that, something fishy must kind of be going on with all the new data, and the fact that we said this, I think, in the last podcast, that, the data's already in. The amount of illness has gone up over years, right? It's not improved. And potential causes, surely it's got to be the diet, right? The stuff you put in your body every day. Of course, Steve, if I remember correctly, actually, I think it might be later on into this section where it talks about the regulatory agencies, specifically in the US. But they were saying how like the original food pyramid was done, or something was it the food pyramid? Maybe I'm thinking about milk. There was an association built to try and sell more milk, and therefore they convinced everybody it was healthy. You know what I mean? So like to sell the product, they created evidence or an association to give it sort of some legitimacy, like legitimacy. Yeah, legitimacy. And I just find that such a weird concept that they have to create these associations to give it the legitimacy to then sell it and then convince that it's, like healthy. And I'm just like, wow, like, and like that's like kind of the origin story for quite a lot of these, health-based associations, right?
No, absolutely. Like, it's interesting because I'm gonna kind of pull a parallel from the age of propaganda when they were talking about how basically marketing isn't held accountable anymore, and it doesn't have to, like, whatever it says isn't really held to any standard. Like they can make a lot of claims and nothing really holds them accountable. And it feels the same with this, as in they can just, like, how do we get people to drink more milk or more semi-skimmed milk or whatnot, and then they try and, like, they create these scientific studies that show it in a very good light, and then they show it to the people who are in charge of making these guidelines. And then suddenly, what do you know, it's like, because people follow these guidelines, it's now a staple.
I still like the comparison of like the priesthood in the past to like the scientists these days, how like they dictate the rules, or like they tell you the rules of God originally, right? Now it's the rules of science, the laws of nutrition. You get what I mean? It's crazy. So obviously it could be hijacked for nefarious purposes.
Of course.
But so this next point I thought was quite interesting as well. So the food pyramid actually came under immediate fire. So even from those within government, in response to the growing obesity crisis, the USDA was forced to back away from it, and in 2011 introduced MyPlate, which endorsed the low-fat myth. To its credit, at least MyPlate didn't toot refined carbohydrates. However, its low-fat imperative continues to miss the point, and it somehow still categorizes fruit juice and fruit and veggie straws as a vegetable. And I thought this bit's interesting because it's like, it's quite it's like a philosophical question, but it kind of makes sense. Like, what is a vegetable? Like, a vegetable includes like the fiber, everything complete, right? The moment you extract like the fiber and stuff, is it still a vegetable? Even though it's from, like, let's just say it's carrot juice or something, even though it's still from a carrot, is it still a vegetable when you've just taken the water-based product out of it, right? And it's a good question, because if you change like the compound itself, you're actually changing it. It's not actually a vegetable anymore, but because it came from a carrot, right? And because it came from a fruit, for example, a fruit juice, it can be labeled as fruit juice, and therefore people just associate the fruit with, healthy, for example, because it has antioxidants or vitamins or whatever. And I find that's quite an interesting way of, like, I mean, how these companies in my head, or how the current, the food industry get away with a lot of these things. They take the worst elements from something, so a fruit, a vegetable, whatever. They put it in a drink or whatever, and then they claim, because it's got the word fruit or is associated to strawberry, for example, that it's healthy. Like strawberry yogurts. Like, you look at it as well, and then you look at the sort of like details, like strawberry extract. But what is a strawberry extract? Explain to me what it is. I don't know. And therefore, we all think, we see strawberry yogurt, we see, I don't know, strawberry juice or whatever it is, or strawberry milkshake, and we're like, oh, it must be healthy because, it's related to strawberry. But if you actually look at the ingredient list, it's just fucking sugar with strawberry extract. And strawberry extract can be like, oh, they put a strawberry in a glass of water and then pour in like a two. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what it is. Somebody explain it to me. But I find that's quite an interesting point.
Exactly. I think it also takes advantage of our lack of knowledge of these things. We don't know what the fuck strawberry extract is, right? Or we don't know, like, once again, we don't know what we classify as like what is a vegetable, So if we don't have proper definitions of those things or proper ideas of what those things are, then it's very easy for us to be, led astray, because they can be like, oh no, this still has something good in it. Or like, most of the juice is just, like you said, sugar and like little bits of a fruit that probably aren't the most healthy bits. So,
for example, extract could be like loads of strawberries beaten to like a pulp, and then you take a tiny like sliver of it. You know what I mean? I actually don't know what it is. So maybe I'm miscommenting on it, but like, if somebody in the comments listening could like let me know what it actually is, because I have no idea.
What is a strawberry?
What's a strawberry extract? You know what I mean? When you see that sort of like, when it's the word extract, it's just like, what does that even mean? You've taken like a seed from it and put it in.
Exactly.
Because that's technically an extract, right?
Yeah, so it's like our lack of knowledge that gets taken advantage of with all these things.
For sure. And it's more like the quick heuristics of like, you know, we're obviously trying to make good decisions in our life. We can't be bothered to like get bogged down with all the actual details. We just look for like quick, like, you know, quick signals of like healthiness. So for example, like we said before, fruit, veg, you just assume it's going to be healthy because it's related, even though it's been so far extracted from the original thing that it's not even like recognizable as a vegetable anymore. You get what I mean? Like it isn't a vegetable. It's just an extract of a vegetable. And unfortunately, like the health benefits come from the whole rather than the extracts, right? And as we'll probably talk about in a minute, like food industry or companies that have all these sort of like, I guess, what's the word? Like natural vegetables, natural grains, they're extracting the good things from it and reselling the good things to vitamin companies, for example, or taking protein isolate out, etc. So they're actually removing the things which make it complete and whole. That's why their name's like Whole Foods, right? Because it's still kept whole. Like they're not being
precisely.
Like, I mean, think about it. The whole point of processing is literally taking things from it or processing it so it's not whole anymore, right? So I thought this next point as well. I don't know if you took a note from this about the supernova in Brazil. I thought that was quite an interesting way because I've noticed that. I don't know if it's the same in the UK. I think it is. So in Paris, they have, and it might be in the whole of Europe, like a bar system on the health scale. So it's like A, B, C, D, or E, or something like that. I don't know if the UK has something similar to that, but like it kind of gives everything a rough like a health rating based upon the proportions of, I think, sugar to fat, etc., etc. What I find is quite funny as well is kind of like. And I don't know if he talks about it in this book, but it's kind of misaligned because it's not actually going off like what we now know as what's unhealthy. So like obviously the more processed things are. So for example, you get stuff here that's like an A rating because it's got like added vitamins, right? Like such as a cereal. And then you've got stuff like yogurt, which like natural Greek yogurt, you know, which is technically meant to be good for you, rated as like, I think like D or E because it's got a lot of fat. And I'm just like, I look at it and I just think, oh wow, like, but people use these systems to judge what to buy. Well, it's not everybody, but some people use these systems to be like, okay, I'm eating healthy now because I've got this something that's rated an A, a B, or whatever. But then this Brazilian system, if I remember correctly, so they divide the food in general into 4 groups. So you got number 1, which is unprocessed or minimally processed foods. These are fresh or frozen vegetables and fruits, plain nuts, grains, flours, and pasta. Then you got processed culinary ingredients. So this is substances extracted from group 1, such as oils, fats, sugar, and salt. Then you got full-on processed foods. So group 1 foods added a substance from group 2, such as freshly made breads and cheeses to be consumed. And then you got ultra-processed foods. So the formulation of several ingredients, most of exclusive industrial use. So soft drinks, sweet or savory snacks. And I thought this is quite interesting because they've actually graded it based upon the amount of processing, which kind of makes sense from this book. And, you know, you can almost like as a heuristic assume the more processing that's gone into it, the worse it's going to be for your health.
The worse it is.
For sure.
I think that's a pretty good heuristic to take away, to be honest. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is interesting how, like, you know, our food guide is very outdated. And like you were just saying, you know, fats are labeled as bad, sugar is kind of ignored, you know, it gives more value to, you know, vegetable or fruit extract than, you know, when it's kind of irrelevant if it doesn't have the fiber in it. So it is interesting how, like, you know, all the things that are labeled either healthy or not are just, completely,
and also, if you think about it as well, right? So if you have a system with, for example, the French one, which is the A, B, C, D, and E, and you start to understand the rules of like how things get categorized, you can start playing around with it through processing. So you can start being like, okay, right. So we have something here that's going to get a D, but we can get it to a B if we go, okay, right, let's add some vitamins to this.
No, exactly.
Let's add some protein. And basically the point here he's saying as well is the more ultra processed it is, the worse it is. And like I remember from school, I don't know if you even take it now, but like protein shakes, for example. Obviously people are like, oh, protein's protein. But in my head, I wonder if the fact has been isolated and removed, that is actually not processed in your body as completely or as properly as like you know, a slab of meat, for example, where it's found in its natural environment, where it's actually like a whole food rather than being taken from something isolated, like turned into a powder, frozen, whatever, and then obviously then consumed. I would assume there's something actually not 100% correct with it. I mean, I still take protein, but it's one of these things that if you think about it, like it doesn't sound good when you think about how it's actually made, right? Like, and how they conserving that protein, like they're taking it out and they're putting something into it to make sure it lasts, right? Because this protein doesn't go off, but meat goes off. And I'm pretty sure meat's not high in fiber, so maybe it's not the fibers going off there, like it's the fact it's organic and it's just being decayed right over time, whereas whatever they're creating in a protein test tube is probably not the best for you.
Exactly. And it does highlight a bit of a paradox in this whole area, whereby, you know, you want a guideline, but to create a guideline means that you then create rules, and by having boundaries and rules, it means that people can take advantage of them, or find out how they can take advantage or get round certain things to make their product seem healthier. I mean, we need to, you know, remember that food is not just like some government thing that is made. It's like, you know, companies, and just as you get companies in other areas that try to commit fraud, or, you know, make their product look a lot better or have marketing, the same thing goes for food. And so you're always going to get people that, like, you know, oh, our honey doesn't have this, so we've got to add this or take away that, and that's how it gets to a better stage. You know, you're gaming the system essentially.
For sure.
Yeah, but it is.
It's
I do
interesting
think.
how
So I was just going to say, I do think that they should implement a much better, like, health guide system. And I remember him saying, you know, this supernova one that's implemented in Brazil, it's not perfect, but it is a long way there. It does highlight even the fact that it even talks about processed foods. I mean, the fact that ours don't, and it just talks about these kind of abstract,
macro, like proportions of macronutrients, right? Which, if you think about it, because they're obviously manipulating certain things, like taking out fiber, taking out carbs, they can just manipulate it to be better for you, right? And the whole point is when you start processing shit, that's when it becomes more unhealthy, right? Because your body wasn't designed to sort of eat stuff that had little bits taken out, things added in. You know, that's like, it's the kind of like classic argument for, like, it's just unnatural, right? It just doesn't occur normally. And therefore your body's used to what occurs normally most of the time, you'd assume.
But they're talking in a language that we don't understand, right? They're breaking food down into such a science that unless you have knowledge about it, you just need to go off what someone else is saying. And you want to be able to trust in this health guideline that is suggesting you should eat this much, you know, fiber and this much sugar and blah, blah, blah. But the fact that that has been corrupted, and as we've talked about in this book, and we don't even know how to read the back of a label on some food, then it just means that, you know, we're sheep just following whoever is, you know, leading us. And that's why I think it is better to have a kind of common language around food, and whether that is, you know, processed food, then we can have a better understanding of it and be like you just said, a heuristic is the more processed it is, probably the worse it is for you, right?
For sure.
And if that comes into, like, the public mind, then we're probably much better off for it.
I mean, it's funny, isn't it? Because I feel like there has been a massive public awareness, I guess you could call it, towards certain elements of food, but it's more like very high level, very macro, sort of like, you know, the fats, sugars. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not in the granular details, but it's kind of in the granular details where the bad stuff is being hidden. You know, like sweeteners. You know, there's sort of things being marketed as like zero sugar, but it's because the definition of sugar is some form of molecule, and they've like added an extra carb, you know, and it's turned into something that is basically sugar, but they can label it as not sugar. It's a sweetener, and it's just bullshit. Like, it's still sugar. Do you get what I mean? It's kind of crazy that they can get away with that sort of stuff. And I think it is in this book later on, they talk about sort of people being sued for that as well. I don't know if it was this book or not.
Maybe. But no, it does.
We'll get into that.
It does highlight, you know, that once again, it's just them trying to find a way around to make their product look better, which any other area, any other company would try and do, right? Like, it's not just isolated to that company. And absolutely. I mean, you know, like they were saying, there's 260 words for sugar. I mean, why is that?
We go into it later. It's mental, isn't it?
Why is that even needed unless you're trying to, you know,
hide something? Exactly. Why isn't the whole group just called sugar, and then you have all the different versions of it? Do you get what I mean? And it's just like, no, this is the sugar because sugar's evil. And he makes a really good point later on, which I love, and I've tried to refrain every time I eat sugar now. For example, if I have cereal or something and I pour a bit of sugar on it, he talks about the fact that it's actually a drug. Like, just think of it as a drug, because that's what it is. And then I'm there sprinkling it on, just thinking like, It's almost, I know it's not the same, but it's like just dripping over like cocaine over your your cornflakes or whatever. It's like we don't think of it like that, but it technically is.
Is that why you're so buzzed every morning?
That's it. It's not the sugar. Oh, no, I just thought that was a really interesting reframe, because he talks a lot as well about how I don't know if it's this book, but it was talking about how the evolution of drugs such as like heroin and opioids and stuff have become more and more concentrated, and obviously become more addictive because of that. And he's like, sugar has had exactly the same evolution over time. Like, it's become more and more concentrated, and therefore it's like that's why he argues it's addictive, because it literally is, and it literally is a drug.
And the fact that like more and more products are introducing more and higher levels of sugar because we're so used to it, right? We become accustomed to such a high level of sugar that we would never have been able to even acquire even a slight amount back, in foraging times.
But I find the reframes quite useful to like make you put less on your food, because you're just like, this is just, if you think of it as a drug, it's like taking a pill. So when you putting it over, you're like, I'm literally like putting pills all over my fucking food. It's a good way to at least make you more self-aware of maybe the stuff you're putting in, or putting on. Sorry, on the extra like sugars, etc. I'll get to the meat.
Cool. Let's get into the next bit. So chapter 18, food adulterations. So food is food all over the world, right? Well, not exactly. Not every plot of land is the same. Not every farm grows crops the same. Not every ranch feeds animals the same. And not every chef cooks the same. You shouldn't be surprised to know that your health could differ as well, not due to conscious food subtractions or food additions, but rather due to food adulterations that result in untoward food quality and propensity for chronic metabolic disease. So toxins and heavy metals. Environmental toxins build up in animals and plants, unleashing their metabolic havoc inside us. Although ostensibly they are not added by the industry, some are the byproducts of industrial, chemical, and food processing. For instance, mercury contamination and seafood is a well-documented problem. You might be lured into the complacency thinking that eating plants instead of fish or animals would fix this problem, but you would be wrong. Heavy metals concentrate in underground and above ground plant parts, inhibiting the process of photosynthesis. To avoid toxicity, plants have developed specific mechanisms by which toxic elements are excluded, retained at root level, or transformed into physiologically tolerant forms. For them, not for us. For instance, arsenic, cadmium, chromium, mercury, antimony, and lead have been found in American rice, which is pretty terrifying when you think about it.
Yeah, I remember on the like heavy like toxin metals or whatever it is. I remember. Do you remember? You heard of Tony Robbins, right? He's like one of those like personal development gurus in America. He went on a diet and he was like recommending it to loads of people, like just like strictly fish, because obviously he was thinking lots of omega-3. High in protein. And I remember him actually having to like obviously stop that because he had a really high level of mercury in his blood, which is crazy. So like it just goes to show like if it's in the food you're eating, it's highly likely that maybe the dose won't kill you for like the first, if you're eating it rarely, but obviously if you're eating it every day. So this guy was literally eating, I think it was tuna or something every day. And over time he just got to the point where apparently he was like, wasn't like life threatening, but it was like near enough. Like his levels of mercury were like so high, and if you think about it, like he was not eating anything else, so there has to be a cause, right? It's quite scary, to be honest. And once again, with everything, it's always about the dose, isn't it? So for example, like if you eat it once, it's gonna be fine, but if you're constantly eating the same diet, the same thing again and again, it kind of like strikes me as like the need for having a variation in your diet as well, because if you're having the same toxin level sort of beef or something again and again and again, eventually it's going to catch up with you.
No, precisely. And I think the sad thing is that there's just, we pollute this world to such a degree that now it's very difficult to get away from any of them, right? You can't just look at microplastics. I mean, they are literally everywhere, to the point where like fish, apparently like you can't get fish anymore that doesn't have microplastics in it, which is just it's dreadful. But how do you get around that? It's not like you can just stop eating anything. But it just goes to show you that these things do absorb these toxins and heavy metals and stuff, and that we are ingesting them to a degree. And that's like a whole other like part that we would never see on the back of a, the back of a product, would we? It would never say, oh, there might be traces of heavy metals. Like,
yeah, no, you're right. No, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, branch chain amino acids. The Italian and Argentinian cows were raised on grass from birth to slaughter in 18 months. The meat is pink and homogeneous. These steaks taste phenomenal, but they're a little on the tough side. The US cow, on the other hand, was raised on corn from birth to slaughter in 6 months. Corn fattens them up faster so they can grow, so they can go to market sooner. Good for cash flow. How does corn perform this magic? It's replete in valine, leucine, and isoleucine, known collectively as branch chain amino acids, or BCAAs. If you're a bodybuilder, you need lots of them. But what if you're not? What if you're a mere mortal and you consume more BCAAs than your muscles need? The excess travels to the liver to be metabolized for energy. There, the amino group is removed by an enzyme called branch chain amino acyltransferase, where they're turned into organic acids like oxalate. Oh, fuck, I hate these words. Oxaloacetate.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, they then enter the mitochondria either for burning or to be turned into liver fat. Like fructose, this can predispose people to insulin resistance.
Yeah. So I originally took this note because I thought the cow thing was quite interesting, just like how the industry treats their animals depends upon their motives, right? And obviously America is very corporate, so therefore they're all just fed on corn to be, slaughtered ASAP for the highest amount of money, right? And that's also what's influencing the food supply, right? It's the way these animals are treated, as we said before, whether it's the toxins in the the microplastics you were saying, or whether it's the mercury in fish or whatever. It's like with these cows, it's just mental to think they're just being. It's like it reminds me a tiny bit of the Wagyu beef stuff, where the cow is literally just brought up on beer for its whole life. That's just crazy. That's a crazy concept for me.
That is weird.
But yeah, I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, you can imagine that it's probably not a natural diet for a cow, and yet we've made it like a staple because it fattens the cow quickly. It makes them fat, makes the steak almost taste tastier.
Injected growth hormones as well, right? I've heard they inject hormones and stuff like that.
And they're given and the thing is, because it's not their natural diet, you could imagine that they are more predisposed to becoming ill. And then instead of changing your diet like we should if we're ill, right? Although we still don't, we give them antibiotics, and then this stuff. It's when we treat something like an animal as a product, we constantly just think, okay, this is a problem, how do we solve it? It's not like we don't look at the bigger picture and be like, well, how is this affecting the end consuming of this product, right? And
the health of the individual who's consuming it. It's more like how can we maximize profit, but also you're right, it's the problem because exactly, if a cow was to die, I guess even if it died from an illness, I wonder if they can sell that meat. I wonder if there's something to be if there's an infection, obviously no, but if they die of some sort of if they die of an infection, I don't know if they're allowed to sell the meat or whatever.
But it's now you get chickens that are fed such so much corn to the point where they get so fat that their legs break because they're so big.
Oh wow, okay. I mean, I was thinking as well, the French have the extreme with the foie gras, with the ducks, where they just feed it fat, and that is possibly one of the worst ways to go. It's pretty, if you think about it, it's disgusting.
We're such a vermin on the world, but God,
the animals.
But it's just interesting to consider that what our animals eat is naturally being passed down and affecting us as well. Okay, on to the next bit. So omega-6 fatty acids. So a rapid switch to seed oils occurred in the 1980s, and our diet became replete in omega-6 fatty acids through industrial processing or corn and soybean oils. The problem is that omega-6 fatty acids are pro-inflammatory. Nutritionists talk about omega-6 to omega-3 ratio as an index inflammation balance. It's supposed to be 1-to-1. On a processed food diet, this rises to 20-to-1. The good news is that grass-fed animals have lower levels of omega-6s and higher levels of omega-3s, so consuming less processed options can bring your ratio close to 3-to-1, which, is just... to be fair, the book Deep Nutrition, the main thing that she goes on about is, seed oils and how bad they are for you. And she does talk a lot about the, omega-6 to omega-3 like ratio. But yeah, that is just astounding, like 20 to 1. On
I mean, bear in mind, he was saying it's meant to be 1 to 1. So that's like a 20x increase, exactly. Right? It's just nuts. So yeah, omega-6 is not good. So the next bit was called cooking your goose. So perhaps the most neglected but insidious adulterations are what we do to ourselves in the process of cooking. Trans fats are very low in real food, but you can make them right on your stove from any unsaturated fat. In fact, you can turn one of the healthiest fats in your kitchen, olive oil, into the deadliest trans fat with just extra heat. The reason? Unsaturated fats have cis double bonds. If you heat an unsaturated fat past its smoking point, that cis double bond can isomerase, flip into a trans double bond, and voila, a trans fat. The lower the oil smoking point, the easier it is to turn into a trans fat. Extra virgin olive oil has the lowest smoking point of all the fats at 160 degrees. Even though lard has got a bad name as saturated fat, it's way safer to fry in than any other oil. The cis fat to trans fat conversion is probably one of the biggest conundrums in trying to sort out nutritional epidemiological data, because investigators can't measure how hot the stove is in each kitchen. And to be fair, that's stuff that I've heard a lot about from my mum, for example. Like she swears by sort of using butter to cook as well as like coconut oil, I think. And she's very strict on sort of, olive oil cooking as well. She's just like, it turns into trans fat with high heat. But obviously here, the point being as well is they can't measure everybody's stove heat. So we don't actually know if you're getting it past the smoking point. But obviously it's like a risk you don't want to take. And if you're cooking with it every single day, he's basically saying here that you're basically consuming trans fats every day then, which is obviously not ideal.
No, exactly. And there's a point in the Deep Nutrition book where she's talking about these different, seed oils. And she's saying that, a lot of them, to even extract them, requires a bit of heat. So they've already undergone this process of release.
They've already become like trans fats, right? So they're already well on the way. Okay.
Exactly. So you could imagine extra virgin olive oil, it's supposed to be good for you, but it's probably not the one that you would cook with because of its low burning point. It's probably something that you would use in dressings or something that you wouldn't cook with, right? Whereas olive oil has a higher burning point, therefore you can actually cook with that. And I think cooking with fats is supposed to be the best, realistically. And apparently, what's another really interesting point is when you cook with fats, they enhance flavor. So they enhance what your taste buds receive. So when you cook with butter, let's say, when you see people,
I always cook with butter,
and they exactly. Because it tastes much better. And the French are very good at this because they cook with a lot of rich ingredients. And the reason why they say it's rich food is because the flavors are very rich because they cook with a lot of animal fats, and that enhances the flavor when we receive.
You're actually probably right. That's a lot of the. For example, I cook my omelets daily. I've actually tried the difference between olive oil and butter. When I run out of butter, I cook with olive oil, and I can taste the difference. It's not the same. It actually almost tastes like metallic actually with the olive oil. Like sour a bit. It's not the best. Next we got polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs. There's no doubt that PAHs, which are found in coal and gasoline, lead to cancer. Essentially, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons bind to DNA bases, generating oxygen radicals, which can cause cellular mutations. Of course, the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons from vehicle exhausts and tire erosion promote lung disease and various cancers. But barbecuing or even smoking your meat leads to this formation as well, which I thought. I mean, it's the classic,
that's sad.
Once again, well, it's more. I'm trying to think where I've been told this before, burning your toast, for example. I've been told a lot, eating, burnt things basically causes. So I'm pretty sure it's relatively well known as a point, right?
It's interesting though, isn't it? It's because
polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, it's just burnt toast. Or just burnt food, right? That's kind of what I'm getting. It's just stuff that's been overcooked, charcoal basically,
But it's interesting though, because I'm thinking that would have been the only way that we would have really cooked meat a long time ago.
But maybe we didn't charcoal it,
fire.
Do you know what I mean? Maybe wouldn't have like burnt it fine.
Yeah,
I get what get what you're saying. It's just more like when you overcook it, right? They must. We love barbecue so much. I think it's that level of like having some like burnt taste to it, you know?
Yeah. No, it's true. It is true. Because I love a fucking barbecue. All right, on to the next bit. So dietary advanced glycation. End products and acrylamide glycation occurs naturally in the body and in food, especially in response to heat. Have you ever made slow cooker caramel? You take white sweetened condensed milk in a can, heat it very hot, and you get brown caramel. This is because the heat drives the Maillard reaction to cause the glucose and fructose to bind to milk proteins, which makes AGEs. And AGEs were, what were they? Advanced glycation.
End products, maybe.
This happens in many processed foods because heating is a method for killing bacteria contaminants. One particular dietary AGE called acrylamide has garnered the most attention. It is formed when carbohydrates and fat meet at high temperatures. It's one of the things we love about French fries, that great crunch. Acrylamide is also a byproduct of coffee roasting process, which is interesting. And
like coffee.
We're screwed. We're just gonna die. I mean, we should just accept it. Raw data to cook or not to cook. Raw restaurants have been popping up in trendy urban areas, primarily with a vegan menu. Ostensibly, eating raw food is better for nutrition, since heating can destroy as much as 50% of vitamin B and C. But of course, this has to be balanced against the inactivation of any viruses or bacteria during cooking. And it is interesting. I mean, like, there's a lot in this deep nutrition book. I'm just going to keep making parallels, but she talks about, pasteurized milk and how, obviously there is a reason to pasteurize in the sense that, it kills bad bacteria, but it also kills good bacteria, right? And the reason why it's probably got bad bacteria or, worse bacteria is because the cows themselves, if we're talking about cow milk, are not as healthy. So it's almost like this process has been, okay, how do we mass produce milk, right? We have loads of cows, but that's expensive. So let's start feeding them this because it cuts the cost. And then all the cows get ill. And then it's like, fuck, we can't drink their milk anymore. What's the next step rather than changing their diet and stop giving them antibiotics? Okay, we'll just heat the milk really, really fucking high so that it kills any bad bacteria. But the issue is that also kills the good bacteria, and it also changes a lot of the nutrients and how we process them. And so it's just quite interesting that a lot of these things are just like, a problem happens, and rather than like going a few steps back and changing something that caused the problem, we just then try to keep going and solving this problem, and then
not finding the sort of root cause kind of thing. We just like, it's like solving the symptoms rather than the actual root. Like
absolutely
we seem to do that as a collective a lot.
No, exactly. So
right, chapter 19, food subtractions. So real food is chock full of all sorts of health promoting biochemical bonuses. Why in the world would big food want to strip it of its inherent nutritional value? Well, for one, the micronutrients themselves aren't all that tasty, and two, these compounds are metabolically active. Upon exposure to oxygen, they either lose potency or turn rancid, or both. So this is essentially the process of going off, right? So fiber 1 or fiber 0. What do all grains share? Bran, endosperm, and germ. Jones demonstrated that during the process of milling, between 20 and 30% of the weighted grain is the husk, the fiber, and that's a lot of waste. Fiber is perhaps the single most important nutrient for health because it both protects the liver and feeds the gut. Yet it's the nutrient you don't absorb because the fiber isn't for you, it's for your gut bacteria. You have to consume it to make them happy. You're not eating for 2, but for 100 trillion. I thought it's a weird concept. I'm just taking care of my little like bacteria in my stomach, or my intestines. You can mill the kernel, but now the protective husk has been breached. The starch is out and readily available for digestion and absorption, thus raising the glucose and insulin response. The processed food industry can claim their product as whole grain because it started with whole grain, but it's not what's in the food. Rather, it's been what's been done to the food. And I thought that's interesting. There's a whole idea of like, yeah, it's whole grain, but it's actually like fine. It was, but you processed it so much that it's not even whole grain anymore, right? And obviously, part of the point of removing the fiber is because it's metabolically active and it makes food go off quicker, right? Which it's just. It's like the bit that's like, as you just said, like one of the most important nutritional parts of your food is being literally removed from most of the food that you eat because of the fact that it allows a longer shelf life. No wonder there's like this like sort of epidemic for like unhealthy gut bacteria, you know, because they're not being nourished basically.
Yeah. And what they are eating is like really terrible food or processed food.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, so it's a double whammy. And then this next bit I thought was quite interesting. So, what happens when we make juice? When intact, the fiber in real food does double duty in both protecting the liver and feeding the gut. The best fiber is the combination of both soluble and insoluble fiber, and that's pretty much everything that comes out the ground until it's processed. Insoluble fiber doesn't freeze well. To see for yourself, take an orange, put it in the freezer overnight, and take it out the next morning and let it thaw. Then try to eat it. It is not an orange anymore, it's turned to mush. The ice crystals have macerated the cell walls of the orange so that upon thawing, the water rushes in, destroying the texture of the orange. Of course, Big Food knows this. So what do? They squeeze it and freeze it. I love that. Squeeze it and freeze it. Now it lasts forever and there's no depreciation. They turned an orange, a commodity, into something that's a storable food. But is anything lost nutritionally in the process of juicing? The answer is an emphatic yes. Of all of the insoluble fiber is now gone. The soluble fiber alone still has some benefit, but orange juice moves the food through the intestine faster to generate the satiety signal sooner, and the soluble fiber can be converted to short-chain fatty acids. But what about smoothies? The blaze of Vitamix, Breville, or Magic Bullet shear the insoluble fiber to smithereens, same as juice. As a result, the fiber can't assemble the lattice work for the gel in the duodenum. I think that's how you say it. So it's not protecting the liver, duodenum. So it's not protecting the liver from the onslaught of sugar in the smoothie, which I thought was super interesting. Like, because obviously there's so many people who swear by like, you know, let's just NutriBullet, let's blitz it up, let's make a smoothie, it's healthy. And actually, one of the healthiest parts of the whole thing is the fact that it is the fiber that creates that sort of like, almost the way I think of it is almost like a sleeve for the rest of the food. Like it needs to be intact to like encase it as it goes through your intestine. And obviously if you blitz that up, the fiber is just like, it's so like, what's the word? Like, smashed to smithereens that it can't actually protect the food to get into the gut. So no, exactly.
And like thing is, you know, like it was saying, they do include one type of fiber, but they just don't include the other type of fiber. So yes, you're probably getting a good amount through like drinking juices and, you know, proper juices and smoothies, but you're just not getting this other type of fiber that is so important. You know, the two go together, and pretending they don't just won't cut it. And I had like a thought a while back, which was like, I wonder whether drinking water impacts one of the fibers, like the soluble fiber or the because like, you know how, you know, you can get bloated and everything when you drink water, and also whether like the water kind of erodes the like shape or the form of certain fibers when you're eating. And because it's kind of suggested that you shouldn't drink when you're like eating. And I was just wondering whether that was because of that, whether it interferes with the kind
interesting
of like
point, right?
Form of like the
about the drinking, eating as well.
Don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe it's worth looking into that actually.
Okay, so raiding the bag. So the bran surrounding the wheat kernel provides one kind of health benefit, while the germ confers a second. It's a little goodie bag filled with cofactors needed to keep the 8 subcellular pathologies at bay. When you make bread or any grain product, our current methods of processing strip away all the good stuff. Antioxidants such as vitamin C and E, carotenoids, and alpha lipoic acids within the germ are also removed during processing, which are then thrown away along with the fiber fraction or are diverted to nutritional supplement companies who isolate and sell them under their own brand. which is just obscene. I mean, God. I mean, but once again, it's like you have to look at all of this through like a business lens. It's like, well, how do we take one product and we turn it into 10?
Yeah, and it's also, but it's also that solving the problem of how do I store this food long enough to allow us to sell it to a supermarket, because the supermarket values the ability to store food, because obviously they know they're not going to sell out the food immediately, so therefore it needs shelf life. So that's how they solve that problem. But also by solving that problem, they figured out, oh wait, I've got all this waste. Why don't I sell this waste? Do you get what I mean? Like there's got to be an opportunity here to like not throw this away and find another use for it, and therefore it's become, like common practice, like he's saying here, to like isolate the vitamins and sell them onto vitamin companies, right? Once again, I do wonder if there's going to be some sort of like level of like, I don't know if you've heard similar, but I remember when I've been looking into stuff like vitamin D and other things, you have to take it with specific other vitamins to get it to be absorbed, so like K2 or something like that.
Okay.
So I actually do wonder whether vitamins
normally those things are together in a product.
In like they naturally occur in like a whole food, right? And I do wonder whether you can actually absorb these vitamins when they're extracted singularly and put into a tablet, because obviously it's like not good marketing, but it kind of make like you think logically, okay, there's a tablet here with all these different percentages or milligrams of these vitamins because it's been scientifically proven that they pulled it from here and put it into here, But I wonder if it doesn't really matter, because actually you need like the fiber and all the other stuff in the food to allow you to digest it in the best way or to absorb it in the best way, right? So just by isolating these, are you absorbing it in the best way, right? Because if it was that like easy, you could just like make a super dose of all these vitamins and everybody take a vitamin tablet and we'd all be healthy because it would solve everything because you've got all the like the correct dosage, right? There has to be something to be said for that. I'm sure there is some level of like things need to be taken with certain other things to be digested properly, and your body was designed to be eating these foods as they came about naturally in the world, right? So therefore by extracting it, you're giving your body something that like maybe it can't even digest, man. It's one of those things like they talk about like eating extra protein and you weigh it out. It might be
and
the
then
same
you piss it out. Exactly.
Your body literally can't process them because it's not part of like a whole package where it needs these other elements to then digest them and absorb them, and because they're not present, it gets almost like waste straight away, and you just weigh it out or whatever.
Because realistically you would never have been able to eat it in an isolated manner. Right? Like it always would come as like some kind of commodity.
They got like pipettes out and like their scalpels.
Exactly.
Literally. It's crazy.
It's crazy. I think another thing that actually reading this book has kind of drawn light on is you have, let's say, a company that has a product, and like we were just saying, you want to turn it into multiple products. You also want to solve a problem, like how to reduce like cost. Okay. Now you have these byproducts, okay, all this waste. How do you make that into a product? Okay. And then how do you make that into a product that people want to buy? And we do it so much, and I think there's probably so many products that we indulge in that we don't know that is just like a waste product that has been sold to us in such a way that we think that we need it, right? So like fluoride, for instance, is a waste product of like, I think it's like magnesium, like mining or something like that, right? Ethanol, okay, well, that's grain. So we, and now suddenly for, according to the food pyramid, carbohydrates make up the largest amount. Wheat and grain and all these other things. So it's just like, are we in this kind of narrative where, there'll be this huge product and they need to sell their byproduct or their waste. And so it's just been sold and told to us in a way that it's like, oh no, you need to eat a lot of like wheat or grain or carbohydrates. But really it's because that is a waste product. It is the cheapest thing to create because they're making ethanol or they're making something else. Do you see what I mean? It's just kind of highlights we don't know why we're eating or indulging in things the way that we do. And I reckon a lot of it comes about from, companies just being very savvy and being like, okay, we need to find a way to sell this to the public. But
it's from a business perspective as well, it just makes sense for these people who are like creating these waste products to like, at the end of the day, it's almost like, I was gonna say it's not free money, but it's like you've already got this waste product. Like, what can we do with it? And I remember I don't know if it was this book, and I always get confused with some of these books when they're all on a very similar topic, right? But it was something to do with like, was it Rockefeller with oil, and he was using his like
it was
like,
in
his
the
waste
tar.
products. Yeah, that was it. He was using tar for like another, like he basically obviously had all this tar like waste product, and he found another use for it.
Yeah.
And then they were kind of like, I think it was in this book, he's kind of arguing he took the same process because he was one of the people who funded the initial medical movement, I think, in general. And he basically used this sort of approach of like waste products are there to be used, resold. I mean, these days you could even argue recycled or whatever, but you know, so there's a saying, isn't it? Like one man's waste is another person's like
one man's trash is another one's treasure. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah. So it's that it kind of makes sense, isn't it? It's funny actually. Like the waste is the vitamin products for these guys, and it's the treasure for other people because they're so vitamin deficient.
Yeah.
You know, it's and there's all these vitamin companies popping up being like, "Oh, we'll give them what they want." Like we'll give them what they want. Magical thinking, you know, health in a pill.
Yeah.
If only life was that simple and easy, you know.
No, exactly. All right, so on to this last bit of this section. So GRAS and omega-3s. So omega-3s are fish oils, not snake oil. Omega-3s might just be the healthiest thing you can put into your mouth. There are two kinds. Oh, here we go. Docosahexaenoic DHA, and I'm not even going to try and say that one. Icosapentaene.
Just DHA and EPA, man.
Yeah,
I think
DHA and EPA, both of which would inflammatory response in the fat cell and prevent the release of free fatty acids. Omega-3s also indirectly affect serotonin release from nerve terminals throughout the brain. When the area surrounding the nerve terminal releasing serotonin is inflamed, it inhibits serotonin release, which may explain why people whose bodies and brains are undergoing inflammation tend to be so irritable, even if they're taking an SSRI or other antidepressants. So where are omega-3s in the diet? Normally they're found in fish, but not just any fish, wild fish. When omega-3s are made by algae, wild fish eat the algae, and in turn we eat the fish. However, farmed fish eat corn, filled with omega-6s and branched-chain amino acids. You can also get omega-3s from eggs, but only from pasture-raised chickens because they're eating grass as opposed to corn feed. Yeah, so essentially just changing the diets of animals that we eat has changed our diet, you know, and has highlighted this, you know, a lack of omega-3s that we have, and instead this greater intake of omega-6s. Yeah, surprise.
This book inspired me to try and get omega-3s, to be honest.
Yeah, no, they're good.
Cool. So, chapter 20, we've moved from the subtractions to now food addition. So the ultra-processed food industry adds chemicals at various points. They may add it to the animal while it's maturing to prevent infection, or they may add it to the plant while it's growing to prevent infestation. They may also add chemicals to the food during the processing for flavor, color, texture, and or preservation. In any case, when they add it to the animal or plant or food, they add it to you as well. So, germ theory. Feedlot animals eating corn are not only carbohydrate and BCAA overloaded, but they're also micronutrient malnourished, which leaves them open to infection, which I think you were talking about earlier, weren't you? You were talking about eating the same thing all the time. So furthermore, pathogenic bacteria can take hold in the unsanitary conditions of confined feedlots. So animals are routinely given low doses of antibiotics to prevent sickness, promote rapid growth, and therefore maintain cash flow. We were saying that sort of that could be passed on as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just the more I look at it, the more I just see it through like a business lens. I mean, even the like adding of like, you know, the additives, you get any other products and they constantly refine it. They want to make it look sexier. They want to make it look nicer, more appealing. They want to sell it to more people. I mean, it's the same exact thing with food. It's just it doesn't come naturally. It's like when you look at a pepper, like a bell pepper, right? You have a prototype of an idea of what it should look like. And realistically, that's probably not the most natural version of that kind of getting that pepper, but it's been like through so many iterations that now, like, you know, they've been able to mix it with this and mix it with that, and now you've got this perfect looking pepper, but it's just, you know, devoid of any of the actual health benefits because we don't see the health benefits, right?
Yes. So the next thing they add is flavor enhancers. So today, everyone expects bold flavors from the food. Scratch cooks can add spices, but processed food companies have to appeal to a wide array of palates, and many of those spices lose potency on the shelf. Which I thought was quite interesting. This idea of like the metabolic. If a food is like kind of alive and actually healthy, it kind of has like a metabolic process to it, and therefore can go off, etc. Right? I thought that's quite an interesting insight. The industry has instead developed flavor enhancers to pique the palate of processed food consumers. I mean, for me, the first things I can think of when I think of flavor enhancers is what people do to like crisps to make them taste like chicken, to make them taste like whatever it is.
No,
then we've got Diacetyl, something like that. It's used as a butter flavoring in microwave popcorn and butterscotch. It easily decomposes to acetaldehyde, which is a known lung and liver toxin.
That's what happens with alcohol, isn't it? You have
I think it might be
acetate, and then it turns into acetaldehyde.
Which makes sense because that is why your liver gets messed up. So diacetyl is also associated with a severe and irreversible respiratory condition called bronchiolitis. Oh my god, I don't use the second one, which leads to inflammation and permanent scarring of the airways. So that's it. No more microwave popcorn. Not that I eat microwave popcorn.
You love your popcorn as well.
I do. I like my popcorn, but not microwaved, man.
Okay, fair.
Yeah. But then again, I don't know if the popcorn I'm eating has been made in the microwave anyway.
This is true. This is true.
So potassium, bromate potassium. Bromate potassium is used to strengthen bread and cracker dough, helping it rise during baking. It's listed as a known carcinogen by the state of California and a possible carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. The process of baking converts most of the potassium bromate to benign potassium bromate, but not necessarily all of it. And now you've got here natural flavors. So did you ever wonder what a natural or artificial flavor was? Aside from salt, sugar, and water, natural or artificial flavor is the most commonly listed item, appearing on 1 out of 7 food ingredient lists on the nutrition facts label. But what are they exactly? They're chemicals, and I love this. They're chemicals, and the company doesn't have to tell you what's in it, and the FDA doesn't require them to. Since most flavors are non-polar, it usually means they're an emulsifier, a solvent, or a preservative, although it could be several of 100 different items. Crazy.
That's insane.
Then you've got emulsifiers.
I mean, surely why wouldn't you just like pretend like everything is a natural flavor, and that way you would never have to disclose anything?
It's actually nuts they can get away with it. Like, and obviously natural just always sounds better than artificial, right? Like, but technically, I don't know if it's been extracted, it's not natural anyway, right?
Yeah.
Once again, it's all philosophical definitions, and there is a bit later we can get onto about the arguments for like, is it a health claim versus is it not a health claim? Because I thought that was an interesting point. So yes, we go on to emulsifiers, which we were talking about earlier. So lectin, I think, polysorbate 80, and carbomethylcellulose, which is and carrageenan, are added to foods to maintain food consistency upon storage. After all, who wants clumpy ice cream? Okay, so these items are used for chocolate, shortening, salad dressing, and ice cream. To be fair, that's the one you're on about there with salad dressing, right? So some salad dressings, if they're mixed together and they stay mixed together, an emulsifier is being used. So these molecules have one polar end and another non-polar end, so they're able to bind fat and water together to keep them from separating. I mean, I feel like this is in a lot of different things. Because obviously, if you've got any product which has a combination of water and fat, they're going to naturally want to separate, and therefore anything which has a consistency to it. I wonder if yogurt must have some form of emulsifier in it. In my head, then, because otherwise yogurt would technically partition into like a fat at the bottom, maybe, and then do you kind of get what I'm saying? Like there must be some level.
What's the other part in yogurt there that it would separate from?
I don't know because it's fat, like water. There's like a water content in it. But maybe there's like natural emulsifiers. I don't know. It's just something that came to my head. Butylated hydroxyanisole, fine. BHA and BHT. These are standard preservatives for chips and meat. However, the International Agency for Research on Cancer categorizes BHA as a possible human carcinogen and is listed as a known carcinogen under California's proposition. So it seems California like to get these things as carcinogens, and the international is a bit slow on the money. So a few more ones that, I mean, some of these we talked about earlier, but propyl gallate. So propyl gallate is a preservative in products that contains fats such as sausages, vegetable oil, soup bases, and even chewing gum. There's some evidence that suggests it may also have estrogenic activity. Then you've got nitrates and nitrites. These are quite popular now, aren't they? Because you see a lot of the sort of meats without nitrates. So nitrates and nitrites are the preservatives in cured meats such as bacon, salami, sausages, and hot dogs. Although they can prolong a food's shelf life and give it an attractive hue, they're directly implicated in human disease. And then the very last one you got here, which is trans fats. So trans fats are probably the single most important reason for the advent and success of processed food. Invented in 1911, the first trans fat called Crisco hit the market, and by 1920, virtually every bakery product sold in America was laced with it, since it acts as a preservative and a hardening agent. Trans fats can't go rancid because the trans double bond can't be oxidized by bacteria, as they don't possess the enzyme to cleave it. And that's an interesting point about the fact that like trans fats are a preservative.
I mean, the thing is like when you look at this stuff, it is amazing what we've been able to do. I mean, we've literally been able to create a food that just doesn't go off. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that is incredible. It's just obviously we haven't considered the health, impacts,
I guess,
or we've come across them, but like now we need to change it, and there's too much money in it to change it, and we kind of want to convince people to still take them. But it is remarkable what we've done. It's just, And like even back then when it was saying Crisco was the first thing to be, released in 1920, the first trans fat. I mean, back then they probably didn't know what fucking trans fats were. And they were just seeing it as like, fuck, we've made a butter that doesn't need to go off,
exactly. We've created something which acts as a preservative and tastes good. It's like, this is the holy grail. And it makes the same with all of the stuff, even with like smoking and like, obviously it kind of makes logical sense in hindsight that putting smoke in your lungs is going to like cause some damage, right? But when it was first invented, people were just like, wow, I got like a nicotine high or whatever, it's like, this is great. And then obviously as stuff goes down the line, you start realizing, hang on a second, this is one, maybe too good to be true, or two, like, there's some actual implications for doing this every day, It's the same with this food stuff. Like we've come to realize we've solved these problems. We've created things that people love and like get addicted to, or put as a stable part of their life. It's solved, like you said, many business problems. Like it's technically always like related to that sort of business problem, right? Like storage and how they're selling it. But they just obviously created byproducts and by problems based upon what we've done. But then there comes a point where what do we value more, the business process or the people's lives? And then also at the same time, I do understand, similar to like global warming and stuff, you can't just like make everybody change at one time, because the systems have been set up so that all this is the way the food system works, right? It's like small changes over time, change the incentives. I think he talks about later in the book, changing like the tax incentives as a society to make it more economically interesting to not process the food, for example, right? Because one of the reasons why this all works the way it works right now is because it's cheaper to do all this stuff now. They've got so good at doing it that it's cheap for them to do it. It's obviously cheaper for everybody, so it's cheaper for them. They sell it for more, I guess. They make more profit, right? It's that type of thing. But if we can create economic incentives where they're incentivized to improve it, you might make some form of change, or at least change in the right direction.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I don't think that, these products should suddenly be like, thrown out. It's just about educating the public and probably making them a bit more expensive or something like that. But, just so that people are aware. I mean, if you want fucking ketchup, go and have ketchup. Everyone loves ketchup, but just be aware of that it's not the best for you. Just being honest and open about it. It's the only way that we're going to progress. But yeah. Anyway, so on to the next chapter. So food addictions. So there's no doubt that we eat more than we used to, but why? We have negative feedback systems in our brains called leptin, which until 50 years ago told us that we had enough energy to burn and therefore prevented us from overeating. As explained earlier, insulin blocks leptin signals, which is leptin resistance, at the hypothalamus, mimicking brain starvation, which causes us to overeat in an attempt to drive the leptin levels higher. So fast food nation. American Americans are fast food junkies. Up to 37% of adults eat some form of it every day. Fast food is highly processed. Nearly all fiber and nutrients have been stripped, and it's designed to tickle your taste buds in colorful packaging. Fast food contains 4 specific chemicals that have been examined for addictive qualities: salt, fat, caffeine, and sugar. So, got 37% every day. That is a fuckload. I mean, that is a huge amount. I wonder what they're defining as fast food.
Fast food, yeah.
Like, I know it says here salt, fat,
like maybe
sugar, but,
I would say something along the lines of maybe I mean, obviously the word fast kind of indicates that it might be quick, so like microwave meals, for example, could be included in that, I think, but I don't know. It's crazy.
So salt. In humans, salt intake has traditionally been conceived as a learned preference rather than as an addiction. Fast foods are relatively high in salt, energy density, and caloric intake. On the other hand, studies show that people can reset their preference for less salty items. This has been demonstrated in adolescents deprived of salty pizza and hypertensive adults who were retrained to consume a low sodium diet over 8 to 12 weeks. Fat. The high fat content of fast food is vital to its rewarding properties. There may be a high fat phenotype among some people, characterized by preference for specific high fat foods and weak satiety in response to them, which acts as a risk factor for obesity. Caffeine. Caffeine is a model drug of dependence, meaning it meets all the criteria for addiction in children, adolescents, and adults. People not only
I've
become
literally had 3
tolerant,
coffees already today.
I know, mate, you are an addict. People not only become tolerant of caffeine, but also experience physiological withdrawal when they try to kick it. Try to kick it. Apparently, it's supposed to be one of the worst drugs to try and kick, actually. Like when you're like really dependent on it. Yeah, it just gives you like headaches and sweats and you can't sleep properly. And yeah, apparently it's not that nice. And last one, sugar. Yeah. So other than caffeine, the foodstuff with the highest score on the YFAS is sugar. In fact, adding soda to a fast food meal increases the sugar content tenfold. Multivariate analysis demonstrates that only soft drink intake, not animal products, is correlated with changes in BMI. I mean, yeah, they're probably the worst thing that you could possibly take. But they're so good. God.
Yeah, I was gonna mention like a bit of like an anecdote here. I go through phases a bit like I was saying before, like video games with like Coke, for example. I don't really drink like Coca-Colas that often, and once I drink 1 or 2, I find myself craving it. Like I actually crave it, whereas most of the time I don't. Like I went through periods like 6 months where I don't even fancy it. But recently I've got back into like having, like, you know, when you're like, because obviously it's summer as well, it's hot. You're just like, oh, I can do a nice cold.
Yeah. I find it crazy, even
because it's just the fact that before there was no desire, but you have like one, and then it's suddenly part of like your body system. You know, it's just like, ooh, you know, I could have a Coke now. You know, it's obviously not very good for you, but you got to treat yourself every now.
No,
right?
But it's
that's a true.
It is funny how like, it is funny how you can just imagining it, like, is already trying to it already motivates you to want to get one. Like I'm not drinking any Coke at the moment and haven't been for a while, but the other day when I was on set, some guy was like, oh, I would just love a nice cold Coke right now, and I was just there like, yeah. I mean, I haven't seen it, I've just literally imagined it, and
it's because it hits a specific spot, right? Like it's that like sugar hit, but it's also like the coldness. I think is quite like refreshing in it. But it's been designed to be like that, right? It's designed to give you that like physiological response to it.
Okay, so on to the next bit. So the addictive qualities of sugar. Animal studies also show that sugar, and specifically the fructose molecule, is addictive. Sugar administration induces behavioral alterations consistent with dependence, binging, withdrawal, craving, and cross-sensitization of other drugs of abuse consistent with addiction. Indeed, sweetness surpasses cocaine as a reward in rats. In fact, addicting rats to opioids makes them binge on fructose instead because of alterations in the reward center, and especially in adolescent rats. I mean, that's crazy. I have heard about it before, but like, it's still, you know, it doesn't stop to amaze. The hedonic nature of sugar is also revealed by examining its economics. For instance, coffee is price inelastic, which means increasing price doesn't reduce consumption. For example, when prices jumped in 2014 due to decreased supply, Starbucks sales didn't budge an inch. As consumables go, soft drinks are the second most price inelastic, just below fast food. Raise the price 10%, example with taxes, and consumption drops only 7.6%, mostly among the poor, as we saw in Mexico. Jesus. But I'm not surprised. It's such a staple. I mean, we have it so often. It's in everything. It just, yeah.
I mean, you could even argue to some degree stuff like alcohol is also pretty relatively like price inelastic. Like, you know, people are going to pay the pint even if it's expensive. It's the stuff with addictive qualities that people actually are willing to pay. Like, to a degree, obviously, like if you start, even it's the same with sugar, to be fair. Like if you made it like completely inaccessible, people wouldn't obviously be able to afford it, right? But there is a point where it becomes such a stable part of your life, like you're saying, where it's like you're willing to spend the money on it regardless, kind of thing. Even if it's like an option, like I don't know, it's the way I think about pints, for example. I don't know, like whether you're in London or Bristol or maybe somewhere up north where it's cheaper, I don't know, you just, if it's £6, you just pay it, even though you're like, oh, bloody, that's expensive, but you just do it, don't you? It's like one of those things. And I feel like the Coke price is similar to that to some degree. It's like you go to the supermarket, like, oh, it used to be £1, but now it's £2. You'd be like, oh, it's annoying, but I want a Coke that bad, I'm going to pay it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's interesting. I think a lot of it is probably based on the relativity to the average like income, because once it goes above a certain amount, then you're probably like, okay, that's too expensive for me, but it's obviously not for others. Like I went to bank in London and I bought a pint for £8.20.
God,
£8.20 for a pint.
That's disgusting. Yeah,
I mean that's the saddest thing I've heard. I mean, oh God. All right. So next, what's necessary for survival? It's true that certain foods are necessary for survival, while others aren't. We need essential nutrients that our body can't make out of the nutrients, but there are only 5 classes. 1, essential amino acids, 9, which is 9 out of the possible 20 found in proteins. 2, essential fatty acids, such as omega-3s and linoleic acid. 3, vitamins. 4, minerals, and 5, fiber. So furthermore, none of these essential nutrients are remotely addictive. Of the hedonic substance found in food, only alcohol, caffeine, and sugar are addictive, and these are food additives, not foods in themselves. That's interesting.
Yeah.
And then last bit here. So sugar is a drug. When you process and purify something, you change its properties. Coca leaves are medicinal in Bolivia, but cocaine is a drug. Opium poppies were medicinal, but were medicinal. That's funny. But heroin is a drug. Refined sucrose is the same compound found in fruit, but the fiber has been removed and it's been crystallized for purity. This process of purification turns sugar from food into a drug, just like alcohol and caffeine. And it's basically what you were saying earlier, right? Like reframing it as a drug.
Well, it's just like
concentrated and synthesized.
Yeah, using the comparison of the cocaine and the opioids, like, taking the actual plant it comes from and then, processing it, removing everything from it and concentrating it, turns it into a drug. Why wouldn't the same label apply to sugar? Yeah. And it creates a physiological effect too, like a drug does. So therefore you can think of it as a drug, and you probably should to allow yourself to become more aware, I guess, of the amount you're taking, right? Like it's like all drugs to do with dose and frequency.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like it's the different conceptualizations of what a drug is. I mean, I think we think of a drug based on what has been labeled a drug rather than the actual, biochemistry surrounding what a drug is, right? Because technically, you're right. Like alcohol and sugar are a drug, but we just don't consider it that way because they're legalized. It's interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Right, moving on to chapter 22, and this was a very interesting chapter, food fraud, because it's one of those things you don't really think about, but of course, as there is the ability for humans to lie, and this occurs across all industries regardless, and it's just interesting the way that some of these, not all, but some food companies are sort of distorting things to the classic marketing, make themselves look better than they actually are. So when asked to comment on food fraud, an executive of a well-known food manufacturer said, "We don't want our company name and the words food fraud in the same sentence." Right, don't ask, don't tell. This is the food industry's dirty little secret, and they'll do anything to keep it that way because all food companies trade on trust. We could literally be consuming anything and everything known to man. I'm sure some things not even known to man and remain completely oblivious to it. Still think your food is what you thought it was? Okay, here's your reality check. Is the farmed salmon really pink, or is it the food dye astaxanthin? Are there only tea leaves in that tea bag? Is that ground coffee really 100% ground up coffee beans or something else mixed in? How about the spices? You're constantly being cheated without knowing it. And sure, sometimes it doesn't matter, but other times it will cause you to inadvertently compromise your buying, religious and health practices. And like a classic example, obviously, was that horse meat scandal in the UK, with the being labeled as like beef, wasn't it? And it is right. We do this based on trust. Like the whole world revolves around some form of like trust, because you can't go in and verify, the actual source of where your food is from, right? So you just assume that they've done good things to this food, right? And then obviously scandals come out when people realize actually behind the scenes, bad stuff is happening, right? Mm-hmm. So the next part was guilty of passing bad foods. So food fraud is literally defined as the misrepresentation as to the state of the food. There are 6 different forms of it, and some engender health risks while others don't, but they all share 3 things in common: alteration of the food itself, lying to the consumer, and a profit motive. Here are the 6 examples of food fraud that reached your restaurants or grocery store shelves without your knowledge. So number 1, dilution / adulteration. Something is added to the food to disguise or extend it. Another dilution example is olive oil. It's estimated that up to 80% of Italian virgin olive oil is neither Italian nor virgin. Substitution. It's common for restaurants or food stands to substitute something of lesser value in an attempt to reap a higher profit. Vendors in New York City got caught selling beef gyros or goat gyros advertised as lamb. This occurs more frequently when the meat is shredded and mixed together. So that's interesting. Watch out for your kebabs, peeps. 3, intentional contamination / concealment. An example is Parmesan cheese. In 2012, cellulose, a byproduct of wood digestion, was added to several brands. In fact, one brand didn't even have any cheese in the product at all. Crazy. 4, country of origin. Many food items are prized because they come from unique places. But what if that place isn't so unique? For instance, beer-battered pollock might come fresh from the waters of Alaska, or it might come frozen from a basin in China. 5, organic. You might think that buying organic would save you from fraud. You'd be wrong. The markup on organic is enormous, anywhere from 25% for avocados to 65% for milk. Furthermore, there's a clear economic impetus to mark individual items as organic, as the only way to be caught, which is interesting, is through laboratory analysis. And just a quick one on this, which reminds me of that documentary called Seaspiracy. I don't know if you ever saw it.
Mm-hmm. I didn't, but I know of it, yeah.
I think I might have used this example with you before, but they were basically, people cared about whether dolphins were being hurt in the fishing process for the fish, right? And there was an association that was created to basically be like, if you got the stamp on your product, you'd be like, no dolphins were hurt in this, right? And essentially what they did is they would every now and again go on a boat with them and just make sure no dolphins were killed, right? But obviously the incentive for the fishers when the person's on the boat is don't kill the dolphins or don't capture dolphins. But as soon as they're not on the boat, they'll just go and do it again. And they're not like these guys aren't on every boat. Like they're doing once a month or some bullshit. And they were all these things were getting these stamps of like, didn't kill dolphins. But the reality is they probably did in the process. And it just reminds me a bit of this organic thing. Like you can just have the association which gives organic stamp. And all they'd have to do, right, is actually do one organically, give that as a sample. They test it. Okay, this is organic. And then they just go back to their normal practice of inorganic, right? It's unless you've got somebody, and this is the problem, I guess, with I was going to say humanity in general, which it kind of is we trade and do everything on trust, and we don't have the manpower or the care to have to go in and verify every single small thing.
Absolutely.
Because it would just take too much time. Nothing would get done. And therefore people can get away with stuff for a long period of time. And obviously if they do, and there's a lot of money involved in potentially being caught, there's going to be a lot of corruption because people pay off the people who are trying to catch them, right? Like it's as simple as that. It's quite scary.
Absolutely. It is, and it's like I keep coming back to this idea that, you know, food doesn't seem like another normal kind of business sector, right? You just don't think of it like that. You just think of it as food, and you just think that because it's there, that like you literally can't tell whether, you know, any of this fraud stuff has been going on. So you're just hoping that, like you said, that there is the manpower and that they are being held accountable for any like wrongdoings, but it's just not the case. It just isn't the case. And it is a bit like, I remember reading this and I was like, fuck, like how on earth do you even tell that what you're eating? And I think it's because you're literally ingesting it that it worries you even more.
Yeah, it's very personal. It's
exactly.
It's very intimate. Like it's like it's literally in you.
I mean, if I buy something from Amazon and it says that it's made in Italy, but actually it's made in China, if it's just like a product, okay, yeah, fine, it's a bit annoying, but it's not going to hurt me as much as like I'm eating this salmon, which is supposed to be caught somewhere else, and yet it's actually been farmed and eaten loads of antibiotics.
And then pink dye, man, like that's the bit that got me.
Exactly.
Like, sometimes they're using pink dye to make it more like salmon, man. Like it's, I wonder how much food is actually being processed in the sense of like adding visual additives to make it look more appealing, right? Like think about it, like people buy kind of an emotional instinct, right? And they see an apple looks more shiny, but they've put like something on it to make it more shiny, right? It's that type of thing. Because presentation's part of it, right?
So much of it.
Yeah,
I mean, you really do judge a book by its cover when it comes to food.
Yeah, for sure. And also with all this stuff that we're just talking about now, so like, you know, the dilution, adulteration, substitution, contamination, country of origin, organic, as you can see, there's many variables that could potentially be gamed here, and in quite an easy way as well, right? Like unless you're checking everything. For example, it reminds me a lot of like, you know, when you read the food labels, like 36 grams of protein in this or whatever, it's like that's taken based upon one laboratory example of which every single chicken or whatever you're eating is different, and therefore it's just a rough estimate, right? It's never going to be exact.
They're not doing biopsies on all of it.
yeah, for sure, exactly. Like once again, it would just slow things down. Nothing would move. But that's when you open up the space for like, you know, deceit and stuff. And also like it's sometimes not even like, I guess it's that classic, not even like purposeful deceit. It's like willful blindness. It's like plausible deniability. Like, you know, I didn't know that was going on. Oh, I didn't see that. I just buy the food. You get what I mean? Like I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Nobody knew. You get what I mean? Anyway, so after organic, we have counterfeiting. So perhaps the most brazen of all food occurs in the luxury space. Finding out that some high rollers were duped by the counterfeiting of rare wines and scotches may give you a moment of schadenfreude satisfaction, but this is a very alarming issue. So this is just, I guess, taking expensive food brands and pretending but that happens across all products, all industries. But it's funny, isn't it? Because like you said before about this, like the idea of it being food being an industry is kind of like alien to us. But the reality is they suffer from the same business deception issues that all different products suffer from. You know, like countries of origin, counterfeiting, reduction of size, reduction. Like it's just
even like take drugs. I mean, they are diluted loads. I mean, you've got the fentanyl crisis in America where, like, you know, you cut when people are like, oh, I wonder what it's cut with, you know, because they're just putting like flour or other shit in there to basically dilute it. And like,
you're putting your trust as well in people who aren't being regulated. But this is the irony of all of this, right? So, for example, it's pretty obvious, or it's not pretty obvious, but people could say like, okay, you're putting your trust in a drug dealer, somebody who doesn't care about the law, and therefore they might obviously have incentives to mess you around, right, by cutting it up some stuff, and they're not regulated, right? But then the people that you're even getting regulated are committing similar things, right? So it's just like, who can you trust, right? And I feel like this is where like society sort of breaks down, doesn't it? Like there's already like a lack of trust in big institutions, big government, big pharma, and like this type of stuff obviously never helps their cause or never helps the public perception, right? And it's just there comes a point where a trust completely breaks down and the whole system needs to be redone, you know, because it gets to that point where nobody can like trust what's being said by big companies, or these mouthpieces, etc.
I think this failure of trust has kind of stemmed from this like globalization, the detachment from the consumer and the producer, right? Because normally you would go to your local butcher, right? His reputation would be on the line, because if he's found out that he's lying to you, well then, you know, no one's going to go to that fucking butcher again.
That's a very good
cows,
point.
all this kind of stuff. You know, it's there's no like accountability apart from like just some organization put in place.
It's faceless, mate. I think that's it.
Right? Exactly.
It's the faceless organization. It's the beforehand, like you just said, if somebody tried to mess you around or did something bad, you would confront them face to face. And there's actually a threat of also physical violence. It's like, it's also so far, obviously you can have an argument. There's a threat that this person, if you really annoy them, they're going to kill you, or like they're going to do something bad, they're going to hurt you. Yeah. And obviously with a faceless organization, you have to take out everybody. I'm annoyed at this Nestle. Right, I need the food directors. Do you get what I mean? Like, there's a whole fucking list. Who is the person? They're like, and I thought this is actually a really interesting point. It was a separate book. It was all about financial fraud. And they talked a lot about there's a type of fraud where it's systemic. It's not even like there's no person who's actually responsible for it. It's the system itself. Complicit. Yeah, exactly. Everybody's complicit. And I thought that's quite interesting because it's the same with this. It's like you can't really look at one person and be like, it's your fault. It's like the system, the incentives are set up in a way that creates the incentives for committing this fraud, or it creates the incentives for removing the fiber, creates incentives for creating products that are harming people because it makes, I guess, once again, the most economic sense, right? So a lot of it is to do with the way it's all set up like that. But the whole point of the economic system stuff is to create incentives and taxation systems to like promote good behavior, not bad behavior, right? Like for me, the role of the government and the role of the economics, like the people who set the interest rates, set everything, and set the taxes and the legislation, their role is literally to be like, what's the greater good for society? How can we set up? But like, it just goes to show that none of this is really being heard because there's too much money in certain areas, right? I'm not saying blatant, obvious corruption, but I'm saying there's obviously willful blindness, turning,
of course,
not looking at the actual issues and just, papering over them, right? So yeah, it's relatively eye-opening when you start thinking about this sort of stuff, and when you actually think about, do you, like, the simple question, like, do you even know what you're eating half the time, right? Like, you don't.
But like, it highlights the advantage of like shopping local, really.
For sure. Like local markets, like butchers and stuff. We'll get onto sort of the stuff in a minute in terms of the like recommendations for this, for like going against obviously all these systems set up against us. So the decline of the American hive. So another frequent fraud is honey, which is increasingly short supply. The people who buy honey from around the world, put it in bottles, are called packers. Most packers blend foreign honey with domestic, but the foreign honey, especially that coming out of Asia, is adulterated. So perfectly good domestic honey is cut with several different kinds of sugars to dilute the product, many of which are not detectable by testing. So food fraud is already negatively impacting us economically and environmentally. We just don't know about it because of the forces at play to cover it up. And that's just another example of how easy it can be. Like, first of all, if it's not detectable, like, and also part of the thing is they think about these things and design them to be undetectable. That's the point. Because if it's undetectable, it's plausible deniability. It's the classic, like, you can't prove it. Like, prove it. Like, the thing about law as well is, if you take somebody to court, the onus is on you to prove it. And obviously, nobody's going to give you the information you need to prove it as well, right? So it's like
also it highlights the fact that, like, we just don't have some of the technology to test some of this stuff, right? So it's like, I mean, that just highlights another area where it's like, unless we have like the equipment to test it, then we're fucked.
We're gonna skip through this part, but this talks about it. So like big food is albatross. So you might think food fraud would be the purview of just a few bad apples, but it's even more prevalent with processed food. And this is because the source and identity of individual food components can be a trade secret, which I thought is interesting. It's like proprietary blend. So you can't actually know. So I'm going to skip down into this bit, like, testing for food fraud is very much in its infancy. DNA testing for seafood and meats is well established, but labs struggle when food is in liquid or ground up form. There are only a handful of food testing laboratories around the world who do food authenticity testing. They use sophisticated technologies that can run in the millions of dollars, like nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy, oh my god, to identify certain sugars, or liquid chromatography mass spectrometry to measure pesticides and antibiotics. These tools have great potential, but like most technology, they're only as good as the data that goes into them. Therein lies the problem. Without the intelligence about how food fraud is being committed, the tools are nothing more than expensive toys. Science can provide evidence, but intelligence is the key to providing cause, placement, and authenticity. Science alone cannot keep up with the criminals. So since the horse meat scandal of 2013, the UK has tried to share information with the US about food fraud. However, producers, retailers, academics, and law enforcement have conflicting interests and don't trust one another. Laboratories are supposed to be independent of food industry funding, but they take dirty money anyway. And yeah, it just goes to show, like what we're just saying about the trust, the checking, even with the verification, there's no guarantee.
Yeah.
These people all don't trust each other. They're expensive. Like, if you think it's going to happen, it's just not. Like, if you think there's going to be like verification checks on everything, it's just too expensive.
But think about how many products are going out just for one product, right? Like, it's just ridiculous. It's not feasible. There's not enough money. There's not enough manpower, and we don't have the technology. It's ridiculous.
So yeah, what can you, the consumer, do to protect your health, your wallet from food fraud? So there are 3 precepts to remember. 1, the more ingredients, the more the risk. E.g., salted peanuts have 3 ingredients. Oreos have 11, so avoid highly processed food. Number 2, buying organic may decrease your risk of cancer, but it increases the risk of fraud because fraudsters focus on organic due to the high profit margin. 3, buy from the supplier directly, e.g. the farmer or the farmer's markets. Fewer middlemen mean fewer entities jacking up the price and people to hide behind, as well as more direct and face-to-face responsibility to the consumer. Like you just said, like it just makes sense. Like, it's like that layer of, the more layers of complexity you add and barriers of like who did what with the food, the more like it's the classic. It wasn't me, it was him. Or like he did that bit, I did this bit. But because they're like, what's the word? They're like different parts of the same crime. They've like separated themselves. So like, I didn't know he was doing that, but they all do, of course. But it's just like, it's classic.
No, precisely.
So
it just holds them accountable a bit more.
Yeah, of course. So now we got part 5, but we're going to kind of gloss over this, aren't we? So it's all to do with the US the US setup for monitoring, regulating the sort of food space, and it talks about the setup of, and also the monetary influence of like sort of Coke into like the regulation. So I think we can kind of skip all that because it's less relevant. I mean, if you want to know more about it, read the book. There's like loads of mini details and dates and stuff, but it's really, really sort of eye-opening about like, the FDA. In fact, I'll tell you what, this is the one thing I do want to look at here. So can you see where I'm highlighting? So it's about the FDA food vs health. I'll just highlight it in green or something.
Cool.
The FDA food vs health claims. So like, so if, for example, a food company, like any other company, isn't allowed to outright lie, meaning you can't say there are no peanuts in the food when there's something's been processed that has peanuts. For example, this is the bit I found interesting. There's 2 different kinds of claims. So there's a structure function claim versus a health claim. So this is when companies are claiming some sort of benefit from their product, right? So a structure function claim is anything on the food label that doesn't mention disease. So now with vitamin C helps build strong bodies 12 ways, good source of fiber, calcium builds strong bones and health. These are examples of structure function claims. They may implicitly invoke disease states, but they don't name them. So structure function claims imply health benefits without actually coming out and tooting them. So it's like vague statements. So yeah, vitamin C helps with strong bodies, blah, 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 blah. But a health claim is different. So a health claim mentions a specific disease or disease process. If a label for a calcium pill says helps prevent osteoporosis, or a breakfast cereal says helps reduce heart disease, this is where the FDA can automatically intervene to protect the public. These kind of health claims are strictly monitored, regulated, and enforced by the FDA. If the company can't produce the studies to prove it, then the claim is stricken. But there is a big grey area between these 2 sets of claims. The food industry's spin doctors spend countless hours trying to figure out how to word the claim to get around the rules. So I just find it so funny. So like, a new challenge is winding the way through the court. So what does, for example, lightly sweetened mean? How much sugar qualifies as lightly? Like, and I love this bit as well. Are Kellogg's frosted mini wheats or frosted flakes are lightly sweetened when the entire cereal is covered in frosting? But yeah, I just thought it's worth thinking about, right? With this idea of these claims and stuff, and how they kind of get away with it being like vague, they're not making direct claims saying like eat this and you'll be healthy. It's like, oh, good for your bones, good for your, like, because there's proof for, like, for example, like calcium has got links to, you know, bone strength and density, right? So they can kind of be like, oh, good for your bones, calcium, you know.
Yeah. No, it does. It takes advantage of our kind of like linguistic associations. And like you said, like the vagueness, it's like technically we as the public have associations to lightly sweetened, or, you know, so they can take advantage of that, because it's the same thing when we see natural, right? Like we have an association that it means more than just, you know, the way that they're abusing the word. But they can use that word and know that we have a positive association to it, and we're more likely to go for it if it holds that. Yeah, it is interesting how like linguistics come into this quite a lot. But it's marketing at the end of the day, isn't it? It's like,
no, it's marketing, man. Like I was going to even say to you, the whole process of marketing, right, is like you got a situation, you highlight certain aspects which may or may not be true. Like it's kind of arguable that it's true, and then you downplay the other aspects. You're like, these are all the positive things, without like mentioning, obviously ignoring everything else, right? And that is literally marketing 101. It's like bring to the public awareness, consciousness, the positives rather than the negatives, right? I mean, if you bring up the negatives, it's bad marketing. And it's interesting here because you talked about natural, and he mentioned it here. So saying like, you know, natural is a pernicious term because it's highly confusing to consumers who conflate it with the word organic, which is a term defined by law, while natural isn't. And that is quite interesting, because natural is really hard to pin down. Once again, this actually goes back down to like philosophy again, or like linguistics. Is like, how do you even define natural? Because anything technically occurring is natural, right? Because it happens in nature, it happened about through time, right? So it's just once again, it's just spin. It's just spin. So yeah, that was that chapter. I wanted to just like cover a little bit around about that, but
no, I think that's good. And then if you guys want to read more about the kind of like FDA regulations around it, although it's American, it will be on the book summary, so you can find it there. But I think we were going to look over, what was it, the chapter 28. So
let's go for real food. 28. Yeah, go for it.
Right, beautiful. So the case for real food. But if processed food is so good, why are so many countries interested in its antithesis, sustainable agriculture and regenerative farming? Why are European banks and financiers starting sustainable food equity funds? Maybe because they know processed food isn't so good after all. The industry blames the consumer for choosing processed food over real food based on the percentage of food consumed in the US, 62% processed. They have a point. But why do people choose processed food? Because it tastes better, reducing spoilage and depreciation, cost, cooking and cleanup time, marketing, or maybe it's just addictive. Big food simultaneously exploits the two laws of marketing. Give the public what it wants, and if you build it, they will come. It turns out most people think that deciding what to make for dinner and then buying the ingredients is an enormous hassle. They want what is good for their household, but trying to pick out food based on health and ingredients is impossible, and the inadequacy of our current food label becomes overwhelming. They don't know how to read packaging, wonder why, because there's nothing on the label that's worth reading. And they certainly don't know how to, and they certainly don't know how to make food choices based on it. Whether they, when they enter the supermarket, it's like walking into an opium den and a cacophony of voices on the end caps of the aisles, shrieking, "Buy me." They fall prey to the siren songs of the tortilla chips, soft drinks, and cookies. And there are only two potential losers in this game, Big Food and Big Pharma. The reasons they currently make out like bandits is because of our current food model, which subsidizes the commodity crops that are the backbone of processed food, as well as our pharmaceutical model, which reward pharma companies for abandoning acute care medicines like antibiotics in favor of chronic care medicines.
Gosh. Pretty damning.
It is. Damning. I mean, it's so funny. Like reading this book, you do hard, get... He sounds frustrated writing it, right? Like, it's quite funny.
It's hard not to like come to the same like conclusions, you know, from reading the book. I mean, if obviously everything he's saying is absolutely 100% correct, like you can't not come to the same conclusion as him with all the stuff he's saying. You know, it's just frustrating, right? And once again, I think the most frustrating part is no like individual culpability. It's more like, once again, it's the system. It's like, how can you how can you attack a system? Like it's faceless. It doesn't it's an abstraction. It doesn't really exist. And there's too many people involved in it. Like you're literally attacking all of them, if that makes sense. Which is the problem. But now we're going to finish off with two. So he came up with 2 7-part lists. So one of them is his shopping rules. So like sort of practical takeaway for, how to find better, more healthy food. And then he's got also 7 proposals that he thought could be implemented immediately, politically, to try and, give some direction and change the current political situation. So we'll start with the shopping rules first. So here's the shopping rules to abide by even before you walk into the store that will keep you from stepping on any of the landmines the store has placed in your way. So number 1, don't go shopping hungry. Number 2, which I always notice when I'm like shopping hungry, I'm like, I could eat absolutely everything here.
Yeah, exactly.
So and you just overpick stuff, don't you? Like you're like, I don't know. It's the same with me if I go to like a restaurant hungry as well. I'm like, starter, whatever, like get all it. Then I'm halfway through. I'm like, oh God, I've overdone it here. So number 2, shop the edges of the supermarket. If you've gone into the aisles, you've gone off the rails. Number 3, if a product is on the end cap of the aisle, the company paid to have it placed there. So don't be a stooge. 4, any food that has a logo you heard of, any food with nutrition facts label has been processed. So that's interesting. Any logo you've heard of is like,
that you've heard of.
So basically any big brand food is processed. 5, if a product lists a structure function claim on the package, don't buy it. Example, any food that says low fat or no trans fat is poison because something else is in there instead. 6, if it doesn't say whole grain, it isn't. And even if it does say whole grain, it probably isn't. So if the carbohydrate to fiber ratio is greater than 10:1, do not buy it. That's quite a good rule. 10:1 fiber ratio. Yeah, that is 10:1. Quite easy to calculate as well. 7, if any form of sugar is one of the first 3 ingredients, it's a dessert. I love it.
To be fair, I've been actually going by that a lot. I've been looking at since reading this and Deep Nutrition, I've been reading a lot of the nutrition labels on the back, and that is something that I definitely go by, the sugar thing.
So like it's so what you're sort of like looking to see on the if it's
isn't that and like
right? So where is it? Sorry, is it on the list? Is it on the list of like when it like literally puts them one by one next to each other with commas, or is it on the is that okay? If it's in the first 3, then is it? Okay. I'm going to start paying more attention to it. I'm going to actually read off the back of this, the Ultra Processed People book by that guy. I can't remember his name.
Okay,
The English guy. And then
remember the one you sent me,
But cool. Did you want to do the proposals?
Yeah, okay. So 7 proposals that could be implemented immediately if we had the political will to do it. So nutrition education for the public should emphasize that there's no biological requirement for or nutritional value of added sugar. I think that's quite key. The industry should be forced to label added sugars, because that's what they added, on food products in teaspoons rather than grams, which will make it easier to understand.
That's a big one. That's actually a really big one.
A good one. Because otherwise it's so abstract, right? It's just like, what
it's like that classic
sugar mean?
Yeah, it's like when I don't know if you saw that video about like Coca-Cola and the sugar bags next to it. Like it just really like makes you visualize how much is actually in it. But
there should be a complete ban of companies associated with sugary products from sponsoring sporting events. I mean, it's just insane. I find it so crazy when you walk into a health shop and they've just got like sugar drinks and things in there. It's like, how can you do that? Like it just goes against the very ethos. Like alcohol and tobacco, there should be a ban on loss leading, which is discounting products in supermarkets of processed foods and drinks. There should be soda taxes, should be everywhere and should extend to sugary foods as well. The tax should be on the amount of sugar, not the volume of the soft drink. That's an interesting point. So that they can't really get away from it. There should be a complete ban of all sugary drinks advertising, including fruit juice, on TV and internet demand services. And there should be a discontinuation of all governmental food subsidies, especially commodity crops such as sugar, which have been shown to contribute to health detriments. I agree with all those, fundamentally.
Some of them aren't that hard to change in your head.
No, they're really not.
Like once again, it's just changing the incentive structure, taxing, and just it's
getting rid of
I mean, we've already taken the the steps for like tobacco. We've already taken the steps for alcohol. Then if he's talking about this like loss leading, stuff, but like we can easily take this step for other things. You know, like you could put, you can make loss leading things the healthy options. You know, I guess the main problem with all of this, right, as well, is the fact that the process options obviously taste better, like, or they appeal more, right, to the emotions of people than, you know, like if you saw like an avocado next to a chocolate bar, you know, 8 out of 10 people are picking the chocolate bar, right? It's one of those things that we're like almost against our own biology here, but
it's true. But the thing is that I think we need to educate the public in the sense that you give them everything, you show the whole hand. If they indulge in it, fine. But then but when it comes to like health issues, they shouldn't be able to claim as much, or they should be able to show that.
I get you. So they put more stuff, right? They're more personal responsible for it.
The onus is a bit on them rather than the companies, which obviously just don't have, you know, they're not held accountable at all, as we've seen.
Of course, Yeah, in fact, you just reminded me a little bit. There was a part of this book where it was talking, the fact if people do go on and read it, it was in the section around the bit we glossed over, so like the health associations, and they were talking a lot about the tobacco playbook and how food has taken the exact same tobacco playbook for like, what's the word, like avoiding responsibility and like kind of pushing it onto the individual, right? Like we spoke about this before, like if they can convince everybody that it's personal responsibility and not their responsibility, they can obviously keep selling and keep going as they are. They're like, oh, it's not our fault that people just eat our food, you know? Which I thought was quite an interesting point around that, because it's like, if we put too much personal responsibility on people, we will never solve the issue, because it will always be the people's problem and not the fact that actually the systems are against you, because the stuff that's the worst for you is the most accessible, the cheapest, the most addictive. Do you get what I mean? Like it's fine. There is personal responsibility because people end up deciding to do that to some degree. Some, not everybody. But yeah, like if we overhold people accountable, we're then not holding the system or the people who are supplying this and making it hard for people accountable, which is part of the reason why people are even like this in the first place. Because the classic, like, is like even in the Bible, right? Like the idea of temptation. Putting temptation in front of people is hard for people to resist. So
absolutely. I think there needs to be
2 pence.
A lot of work. So bloody hell, there we go. That's the book, Metabolical, 3-part series, 6 hours down. Bam.
That was it's like your watch has just gone off.
My watch just went.
Always happens.
Yeah, it was a good book. I highly recommend it. It was there was a lot, and like we were saying, I think at the very beginning, in the first part, that, you know, he wouldn't have been able to talk about this without talking about the other areas, like the political area, like the medicinal area, you know, because they're so entangled and they're so, you know, giving backhanded deals underneath the table. So it gives you
the how and the why, right? Do you get what I mean? It's giving you like how the health problems are sort of getting exacerbated, but it's also giving you why, because it's not obviously the food is the thing that's actually causing the issue, but it's why is the food being done like that? Do you get what I mean? Like what are the influences which is causing this? And like realistically, anything involving like humanity to some degree has a complex mix of factors, which isn't just like the person, it's the collective as well, right? Like it always is. So if you just analyze one area, you have to analyze it all, because it all links. And like I mean, reading this book, the only thing you could walk away with is just thinking, that makes sense. That makes sense. Like that is why we're always hearing these problems, like there's health problems all the time. The NHS, for example, in England is always full, like, because people are ill, people are malnourished, you know. It's like, okay, it all makes sense. Like this like actually helps the jigsaw puzzle get filled together, right? And you're like, okay, now I get it. Now I can understand the way the world is currently, and also then from that you can then think about, okay, what can I actually do to change it individually and collectively.
So what would be your biggest takeaways from it?
So I think from a individual perspective, it would definitely be about reducing obviously your processed intake. It'll be looking at sort of the heuristics he was giving there at the end, so the 10-to-1 fiber ratio looks pretty interesting. Realizing that also, or becoming aware that just because something's related to fruit and veg doesn't mean it's healthy. Understanding that food fraud is real, and we have to be careful with where we're picking things. So like, you know, like you're saying there, farmers markets. So for me, the personal elements is just more just becoming more aware of the of the things we're currently eating, and then realizing that, oh wow, they're probably, for most of us, very processed or processed to some degree, and then obviously replacing the diet to have more whole foods, more farmers market foods, avoiding sugar whenever you can. And I guess for me, the main takeaways in sort of the more collective and system aspect is just like trying to find ways to change the incentives of the system that's been set up the way it is, whether it's through economic subsidies, incentives, or whatever. And then also, I guess, is educating people and getting people more aware of the messages from this book and from the other books we read around similar topics, such as, the high sugar intake's bad for you, etc. Fiber's good for you. Like, all these books are saying the same thing, right? And it's interesting how this isn't common knowledge, and it's not what's commonly taught in institutions, because obviously they have to get 1, funding, and 2, approval for what to teach, and it depends who's giving their approval, right? And this is another takeaway, I guess, is just like, it's now easy to see how systems can go against the collective good, because nobody really wants to own up their hands and be like, oh, we're doing wrong, as well. Like, people delude themselves. But I was rather rambly, but there's huge takeaways, to be honest. From There's almost so too many to even the small little things about like emulsifiers and all these different areas. Like, for example, burnt toast, for example, is obviously bad for you, and all these sort of like mini sort of substances that you didn't even think of was in food that could be causing some damage. And then also, I guess even the 8 subcellular pathways as well. Just thinking about there's like sort of 8 ways to create this like metabolic disease, man. Like, the more I just think about it, the more I'm starting to think, wow, this is like it's impossible just to capture it in one way. But I guess the only thing you could kind of walk away with, the actionable stuff, is just like eat more fiber, eat more whole foods, reduce your sugar intake, and I mean that's going to get you 90% of the way, right? Like, it's the rest of it's just like little picky details. So cool. What's next?
Well, there we go.
What
is next? There are a few books that we could do. We've done functional training.
I think we do something like functional training, where it's a bit of for me at least, a shorter one. And then we can move on to, we were talking about the psychology of was it
Adulterations
psychology?
At some point?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, we've been wanting to do that for a while, and I'd be very happy to do that. But we got a load in the list, to be honest. We can probably actually do quite a few. But so stay tuned, and we'll be trying to be more frequent. But obviously it's summer, and people are going on holidays. We'll get there.
People meaning us.
Meaning us. Yeah, that's it.
Beautiful.
Cool.
All right. Well, we'll catch you at the next.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap. Hey guys, well, there you have it. We hope you enjoyed that book summary. Now, we know it can be a lot to take in all at once, so if you want to be able to read this in a more palatable size, or you want to be able to implement any of those key actionable ideas that we were talking about in this episode, head on over to our website at wisewords.blog, where the book summary will be waiting for you. Also, don't forget to check out our socials, as we consistently upload the key ideas, benefits, and actionable ideas from all the books that we read. The links to those will be in the description below. Now, we want to be able to get you the best content in a way that's really easy to understand, but we need your help. Your opinion matters. So you are our feedback mechanism. And with those quick actions, whether that's leaving us a like or a dislike, commenting in the comment section below, or subscribing to our channel, all of those help us gauge what we're doing well and how to improve on our method of delivery. So if you have any thoughts on the matter, don't hesitate to act. It takes less than 10 seconds and it really helps us out. But with all that being said, until next time, stay wise.